to do the work. And they wanted to pass a budget without the Senate reading it. Wow, there's lots to get to. So let's get to it. First, we have to start with the bridge collapse. So here is video of the bridge collapse. And I guarantee you, I'm going to point out, well, there's two videos. We're going to watch this more than one time because I have to show you a couple of things in this video. This is the video of the ship hitting the bridge, and I bet you didn't notice that they lost power a bunch of times. So here's this is the end part, and we'll go back. There's a big black smoke being put out, and it'll lose power. Watch. Just before it hits. Going to lose power. There you go. Lost power. See? And then it doesn't regain power before it hits the bridge and the bridge collapses. So here is a little bit more color on what's going on. This is a photo from one of the first responders of the Dali and hitting and destroying the center support for one of these bridges. Baltimore is cut off at the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Here is iSource News, massive blow to the U.S. According to preliminary reports, the container ship's navigational control system was taken over by a sophisticated foreign state actor. So is this an accident, or is it a cyber attack, or is it incompetence, or what? And I know I said in the open, it looks like an accident. And this is why I said it looks like an accident. Okay, this is what they're saying. Ethical Skeptic says, set and drift analysis suggests loss of main steerage and power while making 13 knots in a crosswind. Not an act of terrorism, not a drunk helmsman. Back to bed, everyone, stand down. So that was sent at 5:07 a.m., sharing that. So that's one aspect of this. And here's another. Power, and I told you we'd look at the power loss here. Here's an extended video of this. And the boat loses power multiple times. So power loss 1 is flashed on the screen. I'll talk us through it as well. Okay, well, we'll start over here. So the boat comes into the frame. The bridge is going, imagine it's not that long. I mean, it's a long bridge. I think it's bigger than what we're seeing here. I don't know that the whole span of the bridge. Power loss 1, so the boat goes out now. I don't know that we're seeing the whole span of the bridge, but like people who have just got onto the bridge, are they off the bridge here? Like, are they not impacted by this? There are people, like there's flashing lights, there's all sorts of stuff. Thick smoke coming out. I showed that to you now. And then second power loss now, just before it hits. Okay. People on the bridge. Look, there's a truck. Is he off the bridge? Maybe. But like, what a nightmare, right? You enter the bridge now and you think to yourself, oh man, I hope that guy doesn't hit, right? And you start going faster. Yikes, right? Imagine being in your car and dealing with that. That'd be crazy. So what do you think? Is this a terrorist attack? Does this add some color to that? Is it a terrorist attack through a cyber attack? Could you connect to a boat and cause a power outage like that in the engine room? I've watched Deadliest Catch. I don't know that they've got that sophisticated kind of connection, but I could be wrong. I'm not a mariner, right? I'm not a person who sails ships or anything like that. I'm not a captain or anything like that. The closest I've come is watching Deadliest Catch. So like, I don't know if that's possible or plausible. I could see maybe one, like maybe losing steering, right? Because maybe that would be controlled by the computer on the deck and things like that. But I don't know about the full-blown power loss. But maybe I could be completely unaware of evolution in maritime technology. So there's that. That's a big deal. People are going to talk about that being a terrorist attack. I think if it's a terrorist attack, it might be a cyber attack. But then I'm going to need to see how. How did they get that uplink up there? Apparently, it's an Indian ship, apparently, with containers, like container ship. So I don't know, but there are more questions. Don't come to a conclusion, because I think the conclusion is it looks more innocent than cyber attack. If they're going to call cyber attack, they're going to need to prove it. They're going to need to prove it, because cyber attack, lock everything down, no more container ships, right? Oh, for crying out loud, right? Here's CBC News. Let's talk about health and MAID, government murder. Remember the other week when I told you that there was a 27-year-old who was not competent to request MAID, and she requested MAID. The government granted MAID. There was a third doctor brought in to give his opinion because the one doctor didn't feel comfortable, and they said, yeah, sure, why not? And now there's a court stay, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the first judge has decided that the person is competent enough and they can request their own death. Calgary judge rules 27-year-old can go ahead with MAID, with government-assisted murder, despite father's concerns. Dignity and the right to self-determination outweigh parents' concerns. Except that it takes to almost the end of the article to bring up the concerns that the the father brought up, right? So she's generally healthy. The father believes his daughter is vulnerable and is not competent to make the decision to take her own life, according to Feesby's summary of the father's position. He says that she is generally healthy and believes that her physical symptoms, to the extent that she has any, result from undiagnosed psychological conditions. Her only known diagnoses described in court earlier this month are autism and ADHD. So this autistic girl who has ADHD wants to die, and her father desperately doesn't want her to die. And now the court's saying, yeah, she can kill herself. That's no problem. Welcome to Canada. Your daughter gets to choose to kill herself over your objections, even when she's not capable, right? But what level of autism does she have? If she's diagnosed with autism, how capable is she? Have they done an assessment? Yeah, halfway through the article before it talks about how she's autistic. The beginning of the article talks about her right to self-determination. A Calgary judge has issued a ruling that clears the way for a 27-year-old woman to receive government-assisted murder despite her father's attempts through the courts to prevent that from happening. A publication ban protects the identities of the parties, so we'll call them MV as the father and MV as the daughter and WV as the father. While Justice Colin Feesby acknowledged the profound grief that the father would suffer with the death of his child, he ruled the loss of the daughter's autonomy was more important. MV's dignity and right to self-determination outweighs the important matters raised by the father and the harm that he will suffer in losing his daughter, wrote Feesby in his 34-page written decision issued Monday. Though I find that WV has raised serious issues, I conclude that MV's autonomy and dignity interests outweigh competing considerations. How capable is she? Because if she's autistic, does she understand the choice she's making? Right? So that's the question and I think that probably the court got it wrong. There is a 30-day injunction. Here's the information on that. Hold on. Here it says, the judge also issued a 30-day stay of his decision so that WV can take the case to the Alberta Court of Appeal, which means the interim injunction will remain in place for the next month. So she won't be able to access MAID for at least 30 more days, but MAID, government-assisted death, murder. But after that, after the appeal is done, then that's that, right? And I don't think that's great. Personally, I think that is a travesty. We are culling people who are not 100% healthy because they're not 100% healthy, regardless of at their request or not. Like if you're propagandized to that the planet is dying and that your race is a colonial race that would be better off if, you hadn't existed type deal. And then you say, oh, I'd really feel better about things if you just killed me. That's not good. That's a bad outcome from an evil thing to do by the country, right? Like what an awful, awful what an awful thing to do for a government to do to its citizens, right? And for somebody who has a lower capacity for understanding, they're going to get the broad strokes, a lower capacity for understanding. I mean, somebody who's autistic may get obsessed by these things, right? And go into a rabbit hole of how of far left like rhetoric about how terrible colonialists are, et cetera, and make her decision based on that. And I mean, I'm putting words in her mouth. I don't know the circumstances, but I'm just saying all of the propaganda saying how terrible life is because of all of these erroneous rhetorical things can drive people to do crazy things. And I think we're seeing that on multiple levels. This could be just one example. Holly Doan says pandemic ventilators purchased from ex-Liberal MP Frank Baylis, his company, for $237.4 million, but never used, have been donated to Ukraine as a war surplus. Are you kidding me? Right now, Mr. Surveillance says, hey, Justin, Frank's on a beach somewhere writing anonymous letters of support for Greg Fergus. And he's the new Speaker of the House who replaced Rhoda, who got blamed for inviting the Hunka guy who was a Nazi, but actually Justin Trudeau invited him. So, right. Anyway, writing letters of support for Greg Fergus. And these junk ventilators are a serious PR problem. Zelensky owes us and is willing to disappear them, right? So, and Canada gets to look great because we sent $230 million worth of ventilators to Ukraine. Yeah, Slava Ukraini or whatever. Give me a break. Kirk says, this is healthcare related too, had a stroke, drive yourself to the hospital. While driving to pick up his parents from the airport, a British Columbia man suffered a stroke. He lost the use of his limbs, but still managed to pull the car over. Him and a good Samaritan called 911. They called him an hour later back and suggested to drive himself to the hospital because operating a motor vehicle while not having control of some of your limbs and suffering a serious medical condition is safe. Still, no ambulance would come get him. Get this, his parents had the time to depart the plane, get their baggage, take a cab to him before anyone would come and drive him to the hospital. At the Richmond General Hospital, he waited for hours more and didn't get a medical diagnosis until 24 hours later. He's lucky to be alive. Canada's healthcare is a total disaster. How can a country send money to a foreign country, prioritize it over healthcare when healthcare looks like that? That's incredible. Absolutely sick. What are we paying taxes for? Here's Dave Rubin, and he's talking about how Justin Trudeau should really be in jail. If this society was just, Justin Trudeau would be in jail. This is going back and talking about COVID and all the rest of it, but this is our grab bag of governance today. So here we go.
Well, do you remember when Justin Trudeau, the horrible communist with the nice socks up in Canada, remember when he became the worst sort
His socks are stupid.
of authoritarian leader during COVID because a couple people, some truckers wanted to open up the country. And what did he do? He froze their bank accounts.
After weeks of protests, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is taking drastic action to put an end to the Freedom Convoy protests.
The time to go home is now.
Trudeau invoking emergency powers, allowing the government to remove cars and trucks, suspend their insurance, and even freeze truckers' personal and corporate bank accounts. He says the powers will be limited in scope and that he's not calling in the military.
The Emergencies Act will be used to strengthen and support law enforcement agencies at all levels across the country.
They test you and they see, and then they push you again. Guys, that was only 2 years ago. You think they're done with all that? And in retrospect, how ridiculous the people in masks behind him. He walks to the podium with the mask, takes off the mask to speak. That's when you're exerting air and oxygen. Like, it's just so profoundly ridiculous. The man, he should be in jail. Like, if there was a just society, which there isn't, he would be in jail.
Right? The world is looking at Canada and saying, yeah, we'd throw that guy in jail. Definitely, 100%. Here's National Post. They're saying Canada has so far spent $42 million on a gun grab that doesn't exist yet. $42 million. The whole premise of the 2020 gun ban was that these firearms previously approved for sporting and hunting purposes by the RCMP lab were simply too dangerous to own. Yet 4 years later, they're all exactly where they've been for decades, if not generations, in the gun safes of licensed RCMP vetted gun owners. Right. And that's interesting because $42 million is a lot of money to waste on a gun grab that doesn't exist, hasn't happened, and likely isn't going to happen. People aren't going to hand over their guns. I know people with guns, and they had weapons that were on those lists, and they said, I'm not going to hand those over. They're going to have to come and take them from me, and it's not going to be amicable. Like, nope, not happening. Not ever. Sorry about your luck. Nice try. Not even a nice try. Like, stop being communists, you communists. Here's the Bucky Will says, quick, everyone look at the $5 million fraud we're investigating, but forget about the $60 million Arrive scam, and don't even think about the $235 billion Catherine McKenna lost. This deflection would be comical if it wasn't real. People need to go to jail. Trudeau government calls in the RCMP over suspected fraud worth $5 million, right? $5 million on federal contracts. $5 million? Like, we're watching the Arrive scam scandal unfold in real time in multiple ministries, right? Different departments of the Canadian government were doing exactly the same thing, not to mention the 200 million plus that we bought useless ventilators and now we're donating them. Like, nobody's looking into that, but 5 million, man, call the police, right? 911. Are you... Here's Garnet Genius, and he's talking to Patty Haydu. Now, I have a problem with how this goes because Garnet Genius, he's asking for a number, and he says just the number, kind of like Pierre Poilievre, just give us the number, how many Indigenous people benefited from the contracts with GC Capital and GC Strategies. And Patty Haydu is not doing herself any favors because she's drank the Liberal Kool-Aid and believes herself to be better than everybody else in the room or something. I don't know. And so she's trying to explain whatever project they outsourced to GC Strategies and how that impacted people. But I don't think they ever get to a resolution actually explaining if anybody, Indigenous or not, benefited from what GC Strategies did in her ministry. Here's the last part where Garnet Genius kind of lays it all out and explains why it's bad. And the reason it's bad is because he's saying the Indigenous people, it's not being tracked if this money is benefiting them. It's just being spent, and we're assuming that it's benefiting them, but there's no proof. And anyway, the back and forth is very caustic. It's not really helpful, and I don't think it helps the Conservatives either to be as combative. And I mean, like, I understand why. I dislike the Liberals. I dislike what they've done. I think that all of the things that the ways they try and dodge the answering the questions, Chrystia Freeland famously will just explain, and try and add context ad nauseum until you forget what the question is that you asked. So, like, I understand why he's being the way he is in this question and answer period, but I feel like it gives ammunition to people who want to tear it down and say we shouldn't listen to these guys either. And I mean, like, to a degree, right? Because of these reasons. Anyway, here's the last part, which is more coherent than the rest of it, I think. Here we go.
Your government faces intense heat over this corruption scandal, and your only response, is not to answer the question, but to accuse other people of racism. This is so typical of your government. Now, I'm going to finish, Minister. Here are the facts, right? Dalian is a two-person company. They don't have employees. There's just two of them, right? So does it seem to you a problem that this company can get close to $100 million worth of contracts from your government? They don't do any work. They subcontract. That there's no tracking of whether Indigenous people actually benefit. There's no tracking about whether other Indigenous businesses receive subcontracts. And that simply by being the middleman, they're able to claim this massive set-aside when there is no tracking of actual benefits to Indigenous communities across the country. Don't you think that's a problem?
What I would say is that whatever has happened, contractors should be held accountable, regardless of whether they're Indigenous or not.
Sidestep, dodge. Like, that's a dodge, right? Don't you think that's a problem that we're spending all of this money and there's no proof that the people that you represent are benefiting from that? Don't you think that's a problem? And she says, we should go after the contractors. That's the problem. That's the solution. We should go after the contractors. Dodge. I just wanted to show you, I was asking if the bridge was bigger. The bridge is bigger. I saw pictures of the bridge and it's a huge, huge bridge. And so I'm glad that people only on the two areas affected by this area, like, there was only two sections of the bridge that were taken out. So, like, that minimizes it. I thought maybe all of it was dropped into the water, but I just wanted to show you that. I just saw that right now. So, yeah, update. Because things are coming out, right? And I honestly didn't know if the bridge, and I had seen that the bridge was bigger, like the expanse of water was bigger than like a small portion like that, but I didn't know how extensive the collapse was. So I'm glad that I saw that, actually. Let's talk about money, because money is important. Holly Doan says senators were asked to pass a budget bill that they had not been given a chance to read. Oh, just pass it. It's fine, says Chrystia Freeland. Managers sought approval for Finance Canada to spend another $8.9 billion, that's with a B, without disclosing legal text of Bill C-67. I guess that's the budget bill. And that didn't happen, I guess. Somebody says, so what happened? Somebody in the comments, right? What happened? Oh, right, you're here. Ian says, so what happened? I'd love to know. I don't know. Pending. We'll find out. Did they pass the bill without reading it? Because, I mean, they pass a lot of bills in the United States without reading them. Marty says Canada recorded a sharply higher $25.7 billion budget deficit in the first 10 months of 23-24 fiscal year, and that's not good. Why is it not good? Because I guess it's twice what we're actually bringing in. Here's the post-millennial. Trudeau government spends twice as much as it takes in revenue, and then goes through why the math of that. For the same period during the previous fiscal year, it says, and the cycle of deficit spending is only escalating, according to documents released Friday by Canada's Department of Finance. The Trudeau government has a budgetary deficit of $25.7 billion for the April 23 to January 24 period of the current fiscal year. For the same period during the previous fiscal year, the government posted a $6.4 billion deficit, about 1/4 of the more recent number. Enlisting its financial record for the April to January period, the Finance Department noted that the revenues had increased by $10.5 billion, or 3%, largely reflecting higher personal income tax and other duties and non-tax revenues. These increases were partially offset by lower corporate tax income tax revenues. However, program expenses were more than twice that amount, registering $21.2 billion or 6.7%, reflecting increase across all major categories of spending. So they brought in 10.5 and they spent 21.2. So that's not great, right? Because they're spending like drunken sailors, and Canadians can't afford anything because of the inflation they're causing with all their spending. And the spending is just to buy votes, right? Wait for UBI. Everybody's talking about UBI coming in before the next election to buy the votes to swing the Liberals NDP coalition into first place again. And I don't think that people will go for that, but there are a lot of people. There's a strong 20 to 25% who would love it, who would absolutely love it. So they just have to convince another 15% that Mr. Poilievre is lying and that UBI is the solution. Let's print more money and throw it at you. The food professor is talking about the cost of living and food, and he says this is troubling. According to Statistics Canada, the average Canadian is spending less than $250 a month on groceries retail. That's a 19% decrease compared to January 2021. Maybe people are just not hoarding as much. The toilet paper is not being bought as much. Who knows? I don't know why that would be happening, but fundamentally, here's somebody says, is the raw data available? And he says, posted several times today, we've been talking about this for months. Population is growing while food sales in dollar value is shrinking. So that's interesting. I wonder what would cause that, right? Because the population is growing. You would think that you would think that the need for people to buy food would be increasing. You'd think that would not be the case, right? Holly Doan says almost all Canadian retailers conduct cash transactions and a majority still take checks, reports the Bank of Canada. Research follows bank monitoring of digital currency like Bitcoin. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm waiting for, because it seems like it's going to be soon that the rise of Bitcoin happens. It seems like it's going to be not very long before people can walk into a store and pay for something with Bitcoin. And the government's not going to be able to track those kind of transactions. The government is going to then try and solve that problem through regulation or something like that, because they want tax. They want to know how many transactions you had, and they want their tax. They want their cut of the pie, of the pie. I really think we should get rid of all taxes. Like, the more I think about taxes, the more I think that any government that proposes taxing its citizens is doing a disservice to you, unless the tax goes for something very tangible like roads and people can keep a really close eye on it. Like paying taxes for healthcare, taxes for all of these services that the government says that it's giving us. Well, healthcare is, a nightmare, right? Dental, give me a break. So the more I think about taxes, the more I think we've got to get rid of them. And that would just open things up for Bitcoin, right? Remove taxes, make energy as cheap as possible, and have free exchange of money. That would be, ideal, right? Isn't that what we were supposed to have in Canada? And now they're just changing it and turning it communist. Contrarian says, Andrew Scheer systemically and factually shows how every problem Canada is currently facing was created by Trudeau's policies, and everything is someone else's fault. Name one thing Trudeau has said was his fault or taken responsibility for. I'll wait. So Trudeau never takes responsibility for himself. This is a good video. It's 9 minutes and 45 seconds, and they've got lots of clips from the news and all that other. The editing's top notch. You can tell that they've got, what's his name, the documentary filmmaker guy from out west. You can tell they've got professionals who are helping them tune their videos. But Andrew Scheer has historically put out pretty good videos. I've seen his stuff from like 2021 as well. And like earlier, even when he was the leader, but when he was the leader, it was his media team that was kind of on point isn't the right word, but they were trying to do something different than had been done previously, right? And so he's continuing that, and he's being more fine-tuned through input with colleagues, and Poilievre, I'm sure, is putting money into it. So it's interesting to watch. I watched the video. It's basically, we know all of the things. I say that all the time. It's just interesting to hear parliamentarians, MPs saying it, right? And so, yes, it's Trudeau's policies. Yes, we could undo all of this damage, and we could easily get back to life as we remember it, I think. But we need to get rid of the globalist communists. And I don't think that's negotiable. Trudeau must go. Heather says he's a selfish, narcissistic prick that cares nothing about Canadians. He's drowning us without a care. And so here's all the provinces, and they just got dropped anvil. That's not an anvil, but I don't have another word. That's the carbon tax on their heads, right? And Justin Trudeau's walking away, dropping a pamphlet that says sunny ways. And so here's the sunny ways, $2.06 in British Columbia, and we are March 26th, so the carbon tax hasn't even increased yet. They're just preparing for the carbon tax increasing. This is diesel, and diesel is usually a little bit more expensive than regular, so this is maybe editorializing a bit to underscore the point. But everything is getting more expensive, and that is not good because people need more money to live. If everything got cheaper, then people would need less money to live, and you would need to work less in order to get the same standard of living, right? But instead, we are being punished by people who hate this country and want to send all of our tax dollars to Ukraine, really, or Israel, right? Or Hamas. Pierre Poilievre says CBC tries to trick people into thinking Trudeau's carbon tax makes people better off with a leading question for the parliamentary budget officer. The interview didn't go as planned, so Yves Giroux puts some meat on those bones. Here we go.
Parliamentary Budget Officer Yves Giroux, who joins me now. Sir, it's good to see you again.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
So you, I'm sure, have been watching what's been happening in the House of Commons. The conclusions in your report, they're being cited by the Conservatives in particular as proof that Canadians are worse off because of carbon pricing, and that means this policy needs to go. Is that a fair representation of your findings?
Well, it's a representation of our findings once you also include the economic impacts of introducing a carbon tax. So there's the fiscal impact on households, paying the tax versus the amount of the rebate that households are receiving. But once you also include the economic impacts due to the introduction of a carbon tax, for example, the reduction in activity or the slower growth in economic activity in some sectors, then that's the impact. But once you also include the economic impacts due to the introduction of a carbon tax, for example, the reduction in activity or the slower growth in economic activity in some sectors, then that's the impact. That's the impact.
There you go. So fundamentally, they're trying to lie to us about the carbon tax, saying that if we don't have the carbon tax, you're going to be poorer. But the reality is, everything would get more affordable. Everything would get less expensive because all of those taxes, all those bad policies wouldn't be layered on top because we're an oil producing country. We could have cheap oil and gas. We could set the price, but they're not doing that because they want to maintain control. Here's a CPC MP.
You're a member.
I didn't push a button. He's from, where is he from? He's the Shadow Minister of Finance, and he is Calgary Forest Lawn, and he's talking to Chrystia Freeland, and he's asking a very simple question, and Chrystia Freeland is doing her best to sniff the microphone and not answer the question. Here we go.
You're a member from Ontario. Can you tell us how much an Ontario family will pay into the carbon tax?
Mr. Helon,
I thought wasn't she an MP from Alberta, or she just grew up in Alberta and now she's an MP from Ontario? Okay, so here she is dodging the question.
Carbon tax.
Sorry.
Mr. Helon, let me first take issue with the notion that there is anything phony about the $1,800 that Alberta families will be receiving this year. Those are $1,800 directly into the pockets, into the bank accounts of hardworking Alberta families. They will make a real difference to Alberta families. There is nothing phony at all about that.
I just need the number, Minister. How much does an Ontario family pay into the carbon tax?
Ontario families will be getting a rebate this year of more than $1,100, and that is also money directly into the pockets of Ontario families. And I can tell you something else.
So Minister,
the province
sorry,
of Ontario
I'll have to correct
is benefiting
I only have a
from
limited amount of time. An Ontario family will pay $1,600 into this carbon tax. They get a $1,000 rebate. So on average, they'll pay into this carbon tax scam $600. So I just wanted to clear that up according to the PBO.
There you go. So fundamentally, Chrystia Freeland doesn't want to be honest. She was asked about Ontario and she said, oh, well, in Alberta, that's not what we were asking, Minister. So our finances are a mess. How about our... Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful